Have you ever heard of a thing called fluoridation? Fluoridation of water?
Yes, I have heard of that, Jack, yes. Yes.
Well, do you know what it is? Do you realize that fluoridation is the most monstrously conceived and dangerous communist plot we have ever had to face?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic, the podcast where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a bi-weekly basis. I am your host, Nathan Dickey, and with me today is co-host Jen. How are you doing this fine Monday?
I'm feeling bright white and fresh, but not in a racist way.
Yeah, it's just the two of us today because our other two hosts are doing busy Monday stuff. But we'll pull through just fine, I think. Joining us today as our guest is Grant Ritchey Jr. Grant is a dentist by trade who is a vocal advocate for a rational and scientific worldview. He writes for the science-based medicine website and co-hosts the Prism podcast, where he, along with his co-host Clay Jones, analyzes the spectrum of scientific, rational, and critical thought. Grant joins us on the show today to discuss science-based dentistry, to debunk some wacky dental woo and fluoride conspiracy theories, and to talk a little about the niche he has filled in the skeptical movement. Welcome, Grant Ritchey Jr.
Well, thanks, Nathan and Jen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you.
So, start off talking a bit about who you are and what you're about. Tell us a bit about your podcast, what inspired you and Clay Jones to start it, and also, where did the name come from? This is like your chance to pimp yourself.
Oh, let the pimping commence. Well, Clay isn't my original co-host. I ran the first one off. So, by way of context, I have been on a variety of internet dental forums almost since the internet began. There was actually the old Usenet user groups back on AOL back in the 90s. But over time, I've been on a couple of main dental forums on the internet, and it's really a great way to exchange ideas and also get to meet people from across the world. But one of the things that I noticed several years ago is there is quite a bit of alternative medicine, non-proven therapies, non-scientific based thinking that was being promulgated on this board. And I would tend to question anytime someone would say something like, well, try acupuncture for this, or I try, whatever the alternative medicine, chiropractic, whatever that particular modality happened to be, I would challenge it. And of course, I was the closed-minded jerk, and there were very few science-based dentists who would join in or come to my aid. Two of them, especially, the three of us would typically take on all comers. And one of them happened to be a dentist by the name of Jason Luchtefeld, who practices in Illinois. And so as we got to talking and got to know each other a little bit better, we decided that it would be a good idea to start a blog or some form of science-based dental outreach. And we actually met at TAM. We decided to go to TAM, the amazing meeting in Las Vegas, 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. And we decided to start this podcast. It was going to be heavy on the dental stuff, but it was mainly going to be advocating for a science-based worldview in the realm of critical thinking, medicine, dentistry. And the name Prism actually came from my daughter. She has a theater company, and we were trying to think of a clever name. And of course, dentists are pretty concrete individuals, so we would think about something like the Dental Skeptic Podcast or Teeth Talk or something really clever, and none of them really resonated because we wanted to not just make it about teeth. So I was talking to my daughter who is phenomenally creative, and I just said, here's our problem. We're having trouble coming up with a name. And she just said, well, you think of a name and it doesn't have to describe what you're doing. It just has to be a prism through which you see your mission. And I guess being concrete, I said, prism, that's a good word. And so we threw that out and said, how about prism? It makes as much sense as anything else, and you can take it wherever you want it to go with it. It doesn't have to mean anything. And then we started, being cute and saying analyzing the spectrum of science. And so it just made sense, and we stuck with it, and now here we are.
Awesome.
Then to go on, so Jason and I, we started 4 years ago, 2013, and had a great run. And about a year and a half ago, Jason just had a lot of other things in the irons in the fire. He's like a triathlete. He's one of those weird freaks of nature who likes to run and bike and swim all the time, and he likes to travel. So he stepped down, and Clay Jones was a longtime friend of ours. He was actually our first interview that we ever did on the Prism, and then he co-hosted a couple of times, and he and I have been good friends on social media, and we'd met before. So I asked Clay if he wanted to step in, and he did, and Clay just took the baton from Jason, and we've been going strong ever since.
Very cool. So you mentioned in our kind of pre-show instant messaging chat that you met Jenna at QED, and there's a dentistry story there.
Oh, yes, it's a great story. Jen, do you want to start, or do you want me to set the stage and then you take off, or what do you want?
Sorry, I'll let you set the stage. You're better than I am at this.
Okay, so I was invited to participate in a panel discussion last year at QED over in Manchester, which was a fantastic conference. As a matter of fact, I'll put a plug in for them. It's going to be in Manchester again in October, and anyone who can go, it's my favorite skeptical conference that I've ever been to, bar none.
Yeah,
but I got to sit in with 4 wonderful colleagues of mine, Laura Thomason from the Good Thinking Society, and then dentists Sean Sellers, Martin Law, and Sarah Farmer, who is also a practicing dentist. And the 5 of us were on a panel discussion about pseudoscience in dentistry, all the bad information that's out there, like fluoride, like you mentioned, Nathan, and amalgams and root canals, and such kind of wackier practices like oil pulling. And so as part of our discussion about oil pulling, Sean actually brought some coconut oil. And oil pulling, for your audience, just by way of introduction, is this pseudoscientific thing that's going around where if you swish with coconut oil for 20 minutes, it's supposed to do a whole host of things to your body. It's detoxing, it's, eliminating gum disease and eliminating decay, and probably aligns your chakras and cures your MS and lupus as well. But so Sean brought some oil pulling, which is actually some pretty nasty tasting stuff. And
I've heard Sean talk about oil pulling. It sounds really disgusting.
Yeah, well, and Jen can tell us for sure, because he asked for volunteers to come up and swish with oil for the duration of the time that Sean was talking about it. And instead of the usual 20 minutes, then we gave our audience members a break. So Jenna, do you want to talk about how you got roped into swishing with oil for 10 or so minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it was not particularly tasty, shall we say. I think I had the vanilla flavor, and I had a very light flavor of vanilla in it. But other than that, it was like, The best way I can describe it is the least flavorful cheese ever, which turned into a rather gooey, slimy mess in my mouth. And I think I did make a joke at the end when I finally managed to spit it out, and I said something along the lines of, "That's something you definitely don't want to swallow," or something like that. I can't remember exactly what I said.
I think the words happy ending.
Ah, that's it. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't a happy ending. It was not particularly nice. But yeah, it was because you guys carried on talking, didn't you? And then it was like Sean looked over and said, "Well, you've only had this much time so far. Do you want to carry on?" And I think both of us kind of looked at each other and went, because there was 2 of us involved in it, and we thought, "Do you want to carry on?" Yeah, we're hardcore. So we carried on for a little bit longer, and the panel carried on chatting, and eventually we were asked for our experience and asked if we felt like our teeth were improved as a result of it. And I think apart from the fact that they had a white coating on them from whatever the horrible liquid was inside, no.
No, of course not.
No.
Not that coconut oil does any harm. I mean, that's one of the things. If you want to do it, fine. I'm sure swishing with any liquid, whether it's water or Budweiser, would confer some sort of, just mechanical effect where you rinse plaque away or whatever. But yeah, it's overhyped, just like so many products, quote, natural products are in the alternative medicine world.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine on social media who said that if she had $1 for every time somebody told her that all her problems could be taken away by slathering coconut oil all over her, then she'd have enough money to pay out of pocket for any medical procedure.
Exactly. And there's really a clever, I don't know if you two are familiar with the J.P. Sears videos, but he does one on coconut oil. It's just a humorous look at various practices, and he does a great one. So that's funny to look at, too.
Has he ever done one on mustard oil? Because I was given once a gift of mustard oil by a friend of mine who was very into that kind of stuff. I mean, she put cumin in everything after she found out it was a superfood, and turmeric, the same thing. Everything had turmeric in it afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And she gave me mustard oil. And I tried it once, and I smelt like I'd been pushed out of something you put on a hot dog, and decided never to use it again until I would recently found it again at the bottom of a box of toiletries. Has he ever done anything on that? Have you heard of mustard oil as a super?
I have never heard of that. I've heard of turmeric.
Turmeric, yeah.
Yes, I've heard about that. That kind of makes the rounds, but no, not mustard. I'll have to try that. I'm sure it's been used for thousands of years.
Yeah, you rub it on your skin and you smell like fast food. It's amazing.
I'll have to take your word for that.
Going through some of the more wacky dental quackery that's out there, this is something I never heard about before until I looked into it. There's something called dental acupuncture.
Yes. There's a couple of different stripes of dental acupuncture. One is just traditional acupuncture used, for pain relief, or what's big in dentistry is for suppression of gag reflex, like if you're taking an impression, or, some people just really don't, like that stuff. And I've seen photos of like impressions in with needles stuck in people's face, and I'm sure there's a nice placebo response going on there. I'm sure there's, anyone can really mind over matter themselves into holding their breath for 30 seconds while impression material. So, from the dentist standpoint, I'm sure they stick the needles in. The patient believes there's going to be a benefit, and lo and behold, for 30 seconds, they don't gag as much, and it works. In air quotes, it works. But there's also, and this isn't necessarily acupuncture per se, but in the same vein where certain points of the body are related to other points of the body, there is like a dental meridian chart, a dental organ chart, which is really a lot scarier. That is a situation where if you're having kidney problems and it's related to a problem like with a lower molar, and if you're having lung problems or digestive problems, it's related to your upper incisor or some such crazy stuff. And I actually had a patient with some medical problems who saw a, quote, holistic dentist who extracted a perfectly good tooth, lower left first molar, a very important tooth, by the way, because he told my patient that would solve her medical problems. And guess what? It didn't.
Wow.
No surprise there.
Yeah, no surprise at all. And I felt, and it's sad. I really felt badly for her, because when you have chronic medical issues and conventional medicine hasn't been able to help much, you are desperate and you're willing to try a lot of things. And if you have someone who comes across as very believable and trusting and caring and compassionate, then it's easy to fall prey to this. And I know the dentist wasn't trying to scam my patient. He probably truly believed he was going to help her. But obviously there's no biological or physiological plausibility to any of those beliefs.
I have a question which I think is slightly related to that, but you might be able to tell me a little bit more. When I first stopped being homeless and stopped being a drug addict, I went and had a lot of work done at a local dentist up in Kilmarnock, and his practice, the person who owned his practice, was actually on television a couple of times for doing dentistry under hypnosis, and he was doing root canal under hypnosis. And I was wondering if that is, clinical hypnosis is something that actually works, or if that is in itself kind of woo as well.
My response is I don't know. I have some colleagues who swear by it. I think that hypnosis is just a form of guided relaxation, so I think there's some validity toward resolving some anxiety issues or anything like that. But whether you can actually, quote, fool your brain into being a substitute for real anesthetic, I don't know. And I don't understand hypnosis other than it's kind of guided relaxation. I have to think that it's not possible, or not possible to the point where it's predictable. I will say that there are many root canals that can be done without anesthetic, believe it or not, even though you think of root canal as the most painful thing that could possibly happen. If a tooth is actually infected and dead, you can actually open up into that tooth and clean it out with no anesthetic because there's no longer a nerve inside there. So we still don't like to do that because we don't want people to worry, and we don't want any risk of causing any discomfort to our patients. But I have done root canals with no anesthetic before, with no hypnosis either, and it works just fine because the tooth's nerve is completely necrotic and has no sensation whatsoever. So if it was done under hypnosis and it was a tooth that had a necrotic nerve or a necrotic pulp, then the hypnosis will get the credit for it, but it's really just a function of not being a nerve there. So I can't really speak to it because I wasn't there, but I'm very skeptical.
But speaking about root canals, why is it that, from your experience dealing with all these crazy beliefs, why would you say the alternative dental crowd is all about making people afraid of root canals, and what do they have against it?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think that it can be broken down into kind of two main camps, even though they overlap because they're all kind of part of the same conspiracy-minded camp. But one is there was an article in a lot of places, but mainly on Mercola's website, where it blazed these blazoned headlines. 97% of fatal cancer patients had this dental procedure done, and it was a root canal. 97% of people who either had cancer or died of cancer had a root canal done. It just generally described this, quote, study that was done, and it's later been turned out, and Martin Law at QED tried to track it down. No such paper exists. It's one of those things where I think it starts off, and maybe someone just throws out just some weird theory, and then it's picked up and said, well, yeah, studies have shown, and then it kind of gains traction. There's no study that's been done that shows that at all, because it's patently false. There's no connection between cancer and the need for a root canal. Secondly, basically it wasn't until after World War II that root canal therapy had a specialty of its own. So I'm guessing that people died of cancer prior to World War II, and there's just absolutely no basis in fact. So that's a scare tactic, and if you're not educated on how to think critically and how to read scientific literature, be fooled and get a perfectly savable good tooth extracted unnecessarily. The other faction, or the other camp where they try to scare people out of root canals, is based on the work of Dr. Weston Price, who was a dentist in the early 20th century, 1910s, 20s, 30s, and he was actually a brilliant man who did some amazing research. He researched root canals back in the 20s and 30s, and of course root canals back then have no resemblance to how they do now. So what you do in a root canal is you clean out the infection and you kind of disinfect, I'll say sterilize, you can't ever get it perfectly sterile, and then you seal it up. Well, back then they did a very inadequate job of cleaning out root canals, so there was almost always some residual infection. And this was in the pre-antibiotic era, so there was no penicillin, there were no antibiotics that were used in conjunction with the procedure. So what Dr. Price found is that there would be these focal areas of infection that remained around the tooth even after you did the procedure. He then hypothesized that this infection could spread to other parts of the body or create some immune response to lead to such issues as heart disease or arthritis. And I think that's plausible, because if you have kind of a low-grade sepsis going on in your body, bad things are going to happen. Well, I think it's erroneous for people today, 100 years later almost, to apply the research that was done in the 1920s and 1930s when things were vastly different to today. And now there's the Weston Price Foundation. They have taken his words and his research and gone into a complete anti-fluoride, anti-amalgam, anti-root canal, anti-GMO, anti-vaccine. They've just taken it way off the grid and have really kind of bastardized his good name, because for his time he wasn't a woo man himself. He was really quite a respected researcher. So that's pretty tragic. So anyway, people are afraid of root canals because they think the infection is going to go all over their body and it's going to cause cancer.
There's more things that people are very, very afraid of when it comes to dentistry, aren't there? Such as one which I was roped into for a bit because of my migraines. I searched everywhere for a cause for my migraines. And one of the things that I came across was mercury toxicity. And of course, when I came off the streets, I had a lot of fillings that were mercury. And as soon as I started reading this, it was like, it felt obvious to me. It's mercury is toxic. Mercury is a poison. If your fillings, silver fillings, are 50% to between 50 and 55% or so mercury. So I got drawn into this whole mercury toxicity thing, especially by videos. There's one particular video that pulls a lot of people in, which is somebody rubbing a tooth with various different things and heating it up and then showing you in front of this sort of fluorescent background the vapors coming off of it, or what they say is the vapors. And I was wondering if you could tell us what is the truth behind this and what's absolute bunk about mercury toxicity and its links to apparently many, many different illnesses.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I know exactly the smoking tooth video, which one you're talking about. And you are absolutely correct, because silver amalgam fillings do have 50% plus or minus mercury in them when they're mixed. Elemental mercury that's mixed in with the silver. But it forms a very, very stable compound which hardens and serves very well as a filling material. So, yes, amalgams are 50% mercury to start with. Now, once that chemical reaction occurs and becomes a hardened filling mass, then there's really no more elemental mercury available. So it's not like you're just chugging mercury out of a bottle or anything like that. There are minute amounts of mercury vapor that are released off the chewing surfaces of amalgam throughout the course of the filling's life. But there's a couple of points to make here. One is the threshold, even with someone with a lot of silver fillings in their mouth, it's way below the threshold of what has been shown to be safe. Less than we get environmentally every day from fish and other foods and just breathing exhaust and things like that. So it's really, really low. And I did an article on science-based medicine about that and actually give the amounts of mercury that we ingest through our fillings versus by other sources. Yes, there are minute amounts of mercury that is released. And for some people, that may be an issue. If you are in an area where environmental mercury is high, then that, of course, would just increase your burden. So whether or not that can cause a problem is up to the individual. But as far as silver fillings being linked in any way with any sort of acute or chronic disease has not been shown. And there's been a ton of research on it going back decades. And so, again, that's a fear-mongering tactic. Speaking to the smoking tooth video, that has generated a lot of controversy. And like Jenna was saying, it shows this tooth with amalgam filling on it, and it's being rubbed with like a rough cloth in front of a fluorescent screen, and you see just this mass quantities of vapor coming off of it. And they said this is the mercury that's coming off and poisoning. And I have never been able to discern if that is mercury vapor or some other vapor. I've heard some chemists say mercury vapor is heavier than air. So if that was indeed mercury, it would sink to the ground kind of like dry ice vapor does. That perhaps since the teeth were stored in water, what we're just really seeing is water vapor. And I've never seen like a controlled demonstration where they just rub a regular tooth with no amalgam in it to see if you get any type of vapor. And I'd love to replicate that video under different circumstances to really tell what's happening. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So whether or not it's mercury vapor or not, or whatever it is, it looks really scary. And if your mind is primed to be afraid of that, then your confirmation bias will kick in and you will latch onto that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of fear over that. But no, it's never been shown to be harmful at all. It's been demonstrated time and time again to be a very safe and durable filling material.
Another thing that they kind of tag on to that is this idea that crematoriums are the main source of mercury in our atmosphere. And that there's more mercury released from crematoria because of silver fillings in teeth than any other industry that we actually utilize, that we actually have in the UK. Is there any truth to that at all?
I don't know. That's a great theory. I know that as far as certain types of mercury, there's ethyl mercury, there's methyl mercury, there's elemental mercury. So part of this is some forms of mercury are very toxic and some forms are not as toxic because I know fish, as far as environmentally, having fish in your diet can lead to high levels of mercury. But that actually does make sense. I just don't know what the density of crematoria are in the U.S., UK, and elsewhere, if there's a critical mass enough to really crank that much mercury out. But I'm sure that is a source of it. But yeah, that's really fascinating. And another thing I would point out is one of the kind of the confirming issues as far as mercury toxicity is if this were true, if overexposure to the mercury vapors due to dental fillings was an issue where you would see it the most would be in dentists and dental assistants. Every single day in my office, I'm grinding out old silver fillings. They get new decay around it. They're 20 years old. They're 40 years old. They break. We replace them with different materials. And so every time you grind on if I take my little handpiece and grind out an old silver filling, it's generating a fair amount of mercury vapor. And I'm very abnormal in so many ways, but I don't think any of them are due to the exposure of mercury. My dad's a dentist, and when I was a child, and so this would have been 60s and 70s, he would actually mix up his own amalgam. He had a giant jug, probably a pint jug of mercury, weighed about 30 pounds. And of course, I was a kid, we'd just go pour it in our hands and play with it. But and back then, dentists didn't wear gloves. And so he would actually take a silver pellet, put it in a little mixing bowl, and he would squirt a certain amount of mercury in there. And with his little mortar and pestle, he would hand grind it into the little plastic mass. And then he would put it in the palm of his hand, and he would kind of press it with his thumb to get it the right shape. And then he would put it in the tooth. And so who knows how much mercury was absorbed through his skin and that he breathed every day and he spilled into the 70s shag carpet he had in his office. And my dad's abnormal in many ways too, but I don't think any of those are due to mercury vapor. So, that's kind of an anecdote in a way, but if there was a linear correlation between mercury exposure and any type of chronic pathologies, you would see it in dental team members well before you'd see it in the general public.
I guess that's why they play theatre. And the holistic dentist that I went to have all my 6 or 7 fillings taken out and replaced with white fillings, he has a huge pipe, a huge ventilation pipe that comes down and it sits right in front of your face while you're watching the television, and it kind of sucks it all out. And what he explains is that that helps them to get the mercury vapor away from them, so they don't have as much exposure, because that's one of the main things that they do and all this kind of stuff. It's a big bit of theatre, and it's a massive machine. It looks impressive.
And I bet you felt really safe because you knew that.
Oh, I did.
Well, I've seen some dentists that they wear. It's almost like a full-on hazmat suit. I mean, it's like they're handling plutonium.
Like they're handling E.T. from E.T.
Yeah, exactly. They have those kind of suits on because they take that so seriously. So, yeah, good point.
On the other side of it, I've heard, it's my understanding that some dentists actually cross a different kind of ethical line with mercury amalgam fillings and seem to present them as almost like a cure-all panacea. Is that something that goes on also?
It does. It flies a little bit under the radar now because there have been so many lawsuits and so many dentists who have lost their license. But it started mainly in the 70s with a dentist in Colorado named Hal Huggins, who was kind of the father of anti-mercury movement. And he would advertise and claim that by removing and replacing mouthfuls of silver fillings that one's chronic illnesses, if you have MS, for example, just have your mercury fillings removed and it's going to cure your MS or your Parkinson's, or list goes on, whatever malady you had. And he lost his license. That's practicing medicine without a license if you're diagnosing and treating a medical condition that way. And a lot of dentists have followed in his footsteps, and now he's a hero of Wakefieldian proportions. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as Andrew Wakefield with vaccines, is the more he's persecuted, then the bigger a hero he is. And so a lot of people are still claiming that replacing silver fillings will cure a host of illnesses. And that's just, like you said, Nathan, that's just completely crossing an ethical line, and it's really bilking people out of a lot of money, not to mention pain and suffering and all that goes along with it.
Something I wanted to ask you about as well is one of the ways that they sell white fillings is they talk about the fact that with mercury amalgams or other amalgams, if there is such a thing, I'm not sure, they have to drill out quite a lot of the tooth to pack the filling into it so that it'll grip, because it has no bonding compound itself. It's not actually attaching itself to the tooth, apparently. Whereas with a white filling, they only need to drill out a tiny little bit of decay and then actually just apply it over the top and it bonds to the tooth. And that was one of the reasons one of the ways in which I was sold white fillings over amalgams, completely aside from the potential health risks of mercury amalgam fillings. Is there truth to that? Do you actually have to drill out a lot more of a tooth to get an amalgam filling in there? Or is that just a way of selling a more expensive product?
No, that's actually very truthful. composite restorations or tooth-colored bonded fillings are so much more conservative for that very reason. With the conventional way that we learn to prepare a tooth for an amalgam filling, it's pretty extensive. You have to extend it pretty far and wide in the tooth, and you have to go fairly deep to get enough bulk of the amalgam so that it won't fracture. And then you have to create undercuts. So you actually have to go in and kind of undermine the enamel so that it will lock in, like you said, Jen, because there's no bonding. Whereas there's a whole branch of dentistry based around that concept with bonded fillings called minimally invasive dentistry, where you can really just laser, not literally with a laser, I guess you could, but I mean, you can just drill out the little spot that's affected and the bonding will keep the filling in place. So much healthier for the tooth, much more conservative, and much better in the long run. And in fact, as a way of disclosure, I haven't done an amalgam filling in over 20 years. But it has nothing to do with the health risks. I just think there's so many better materials out there that I have no desire to do any silver amalgam fillings. And one of the reasons is that it is more conservative on the teeth. But that being said, I fully support the use of amalgams, and it's a good restoration.
Let's move on to something that I'm particularly interested in, and that's fluoride. What is with all the misinformation about fluoride, and not just misinformation, but there are full-blown mythologies, aka conspiracy theories, that have blossomed up around fluoride.
Yeah, because Hitler used it, Nathan. Hitler used it to subdue people. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, that's probably, and I don't know if the meme that's going around, and I don't know if that's actually where it began. It seems like that's only something that I've heard recently, so I don't know if people have kind of retrofitted the Hitler meme onto fluoride. I have known for a long time that people thought that the communists used it for mind control. You know, back in the Cold War, 50s and 60s. And if any of you have seen Dr. Strangelove, sapping and purifying my precious bodily fluids, you know, it was a joke, and that was 1964, I believe. So, you know, it's gone back to at least that far.
I'm pretty sure there's a verse in the Bible about Satan using it or something.
Yes, I'm sure. I think it was in Exodus or something. But yeah, it's, you know, I think there are several ways you can slice this. One is the issue of the ethical considerations that some people say, I don't care if it's effective or not, the government doesn't have a right to, quote, medicate our water, mass medication. And you can make the argument whether that's true or not, or you can have a libertarian aspect of it. And I respect that argument completely. I mean, even if I thought that was the greatest thing, which I do, fluoride is one of the 20th century's greatest health benefits, right up there with vaccines and car seats or something like that. But anyway, if you come down on it from the ethical standpoint, you've got a fine argument. Maybe the government should put it in our water. Maybe they should. That's a good discussion. I don't think it's medication because it is just an ion of a compound. It's like putting iodine in salt or that type of thing, and the benefits are.
Oh, it's on my side. Sorry. This is one of the reasons I'm actually moving, because it's constant with the ambulances here.
I thought maybe they're coming to take you away because of all the fluoride and mercury you ingest.
No, it's just because I'm mental. That's the only reason they want to take me away.
Yeah, exactly. So
that is the fluoride, though. You're right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So it's really not a medication per se. It's just a way to strengthen tooth enamel. And when used in proper dosage, there's really very few to no side effects other than maybe some cosmetic blemishing of the teeth. So that's really where it kind of took off. But just like anything, if you're against something, then you're going to look for reasons to be against it. And so since then, they have extrapolated, and I say they, the anti-fluoridation movement, it's a neurotoxin. They have taken an overdose of fluoride, elemental fluoride, or certain types of fluoride in industrial waste. Absolutely bad. Do not drink it. It's bad in high doses. It will mess your brain up. And so they don't understand the concept of the dose is the poison. Mm-hmm. And so there's a difference between having an industrial spill in a river in China and the effects on a population downstream versus the correct amount of fluoride in a municipal water supply. So that's an easy way to scare people if you're not a science-based person or don't know how to evaluate literature. And I tell you, did you know that fluoride in the water in China resulted in 10 IQ point drop in intelligence in the children there? Oh my God, why would you do that then? Well, that was based on a survey of not only an industrial accident in a river, but also just other elements like lead and arsenic and other neurotoxic compounds that are out there. So, again, a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, a friend cited that very paper in his argument that fluoride was
It was
bad.
a Harvard paper, Nathan.
Oh, yeah. And he emphasized those laurels as well, that it was a Harvard paper, and it was clear to me just by talking to him that he had actually read it. But but he set up a Facebook group, an anti-fluoride Facebook group, and everything, and it just seems strange to me. Like, what is it that makes people get up in the morning and that's the thing you're going to do? You know,
right.
That's what gives you purpose in life, is you're going to protest against fluoride. It just seems strange.
It does seem strange, and I think if you come from that worldview where we live in a toxic society, and it's a chemophobic society these days. You hear food babes saying there are chemicals everywhere. Then it's easy to latch on to this. But also it also shows how you can cherry pick legitimate scientific data to say whatever you want it to say.
Yeah.
There's a study in Lancet over in your neck of the woods, Jenna, that talked about the effect of certain neurotoxins on cognitive development. And fluoride was mentioned maybe once or twice, but not specifically. It's just like, this is one of the things we looked at. But they mainly spoke about lead, polychlorinated biphenyls, arsenic, toluene, manganese, tetrachloroethylene, all these other compounds. And we also looked at this, but they never really said fluoride was implicated at all. But because the word fluoride appeared in that journal, you can say, well, a Lancet study says, and people will believe you. And no one's going to go look at the primary research. They're just going to take it for face value.
Slight side note, have you ever tried fluoride-free natural toothpaste?
I have.
What did you think of it? I tried some really sort of expensive stuff. I think it came from Norway or Sweden, called Urtekram, in a licorice flavour.
Ew.
And they'd removed fluoride, they'd removed foaming agents and everything from it. So it was basically just like rubbing watery chalk on your teeth.
Well, and that's another little chemophobic thing, is a lot of toothpastes say no sodium lauryl sulfate, which is the foaming agent. I've tried some, quote, normal toothpaste that just happen to not have fluoride in it, and you really wouldn't know the difference because everything else is the same. And, if you're 50 years old and you've never had a cavity and you have a good diet and you're a low caries risk, then you can probably brush with a non-fluoridated toothpaste and do just fine. But, for the rest of us, it's never a bad idea to brush with a fluoridated toothpaste. The charcoal toothpaste that's going around, or brushing with charcoal, and it's on the Facebook and everywhere, where, you see this black foaming stuff coming out. And they say how it detoxifies and it's non-fluoridated. And then when I spoke with Miles Power on his League of Nerds podcast, he had purchased like a homeopathic toothpaste.
Yes.
So you don't actually put it in your mouth, or it's just made of water, or how does that work?
Well, that's kind of what we thought. And basically what it was is he contacted the company, and they're like, oh, no. It's not a homeopathic toothpaste. It's just safe to use if you're also taking homeopathic remedies, which is just, it was just laughable. It was just laughable. And Miles is a pretty calm, mild-mannered individual, but he actually kind of got all riled up about that. But yeah, it was kind of funny.
That old toothpaste must be quite abrasive, though, surely, as in really abrasive.
I haven't seen that there's an abrasive index that we use to gauge these things, and I don't know. I would think so too, Jen. I think that could be very well be abrasive, but it's just all marketing. I mean, that's what it is. It's not based in anything scientific. It's just marketing, and people latch onto that.
Going on to a different dental-related topic, there's one issue that there seems to be not a controversy, but a debate among dentists going on, and that concerns flossing. Does flossing help prevent tooth decay, and what is the evidence, if any, that flossing helps? Some, like Sean Sellers, will encourage against flossing among people in the general public, and others, I think most other dentists, stick with the traditional line that, yes, we should floss.
Well, rule number one is never listen to Sean Sellers. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking. I'm just kidding because Sean's a good friend of mine. But Yeah, when that has had several iterations. It hit about 3 years ago, and then it hit the news again about a year ago, and then I think just maybe a few months ago. But anyway, as far as background, there was a meta-analysis done where some researchers went through and looked at all the research about flossing in the area of prevention of gum disease and prevention of tooth decay. And in a meta-analysis, the research has to be of decent quality and has to meet certain criteria. And then once you kind of blend them all together, they're usually pretty reliable at showing trends or what the research really showed. And basically what it showed was that flossing doesn't work. And that's, of course, headlines, news outlets love to turn conventional wisdom on its head. Flossing doesn't work. And so, you're definitely going to get some clicks and some eyeballs when you post something like that. Well, again, when you don't know how or don't care enough to click down and really look at the underlying message, then you don't understand exactly how that meta-analysis really turned out. Because, yes, it is indeed true. The research shows that people left to their own devices don't floss very well, and it really does not prevent tooth decay, nor does it prevent gum disease. And I can say that in that situation, in that instance, that is absolutely a true statement. But when you slice it, there was one of the studies of the meta-analysis is kids were flossed by dental professionals 5 days a week. I can't remember if a hygienist or a dentist came to the school and flossed them properly every day for a long period of time. Crazy study. But in that situation, it worked. That shows this is a good example of the difference between efficacy and effectiveness. So this is efficacy. So flossing does work. But if you only do it a few days a week or the night before your 6-month dental checkup, like most patients, or if you do it every day but don't do it correctly, you don't have proper technique, then it's not effective. That's effectiveness. You can do it, but unless you do it right, it's not effective. So the bottom line is flossing is efficacious. It has efficacy, but it does not have good effectiveness. And that's not a function of that it's not needed or anything like that. It's just if you do it right, it works. And so we encourage people to continue to floss, but do it right. And now, if you do it incorrectly, it's still okay because you get those nasty, strings of barbecue out from between your teeth, and it still makes your teeth feel better. And
I call those nasty bits of barbecue an evening snack.
Yeah, you can you save it for later and just kind of yeah, exactly.
It's like the pouches on a guinea pig or a gerbil.
Exactly. And sometimes with age, it actually kind of improves the flavor, like a fine wine. But yeah, that is the controversy, is trying to really discern what the article is trying to say. And of course, headlines. There's one headline that says flossing your teeth is. Of course, this is Daily Mail, so take that for what it's worth. But it says flossing can be a waste of time and can do more harm than good. Well, that was never stated anywhere in any of the research, but it's a headline. Editors choose the headline. So it's something that we still tell our patients to floss. I mean, even if they do it incorrectly, in my opinion, it's better than nothing, and it does no harm. But what I've really been careful to say now, since that research came out, is I don't tell patients, hey, you floss, it's going to prevent cavities, gum disease. Because now I can't say that scientifically because my statement is not backed up by the evidence. But I do say if you floss correctly and every day, it can prevent tooth decay and gum disease. I don't care what Sean Sellers says.
Another usual quack cure is what I've seen quite recently is vitamin C. Is that promoted much in quack dentistry?
Not as much as it used to be. And it's interesting that you say that, because I just got back from a seminar over this past weekend. Now, it dealt more with sleep apnea and things like that, which some dentists are getting into that I won't go into. But one of the lectures I saw was a big screed about vitamin D, or vitamin D, as you say, and about how it's the the latest, it's the vitamin of the week. It used to be E, and then it was C before that. But they're saying it cures all sorts of things, from cancer to sleep disorders to everything else. And it's one of those things, like with C, if you have a diagnosed bona fide deficiency, then yes, you need it. but I can say in 30 plus years of practice, I've never seen anyone with scurvy. And, that's where it works. So, if you have proper levels of any minerals and vitamins, then you're going to be fine, and it really does not affect dental health whatsoever. Or the research has not shown that it affects any dental health.
And have you come across ozone therapy as part of Quack Dentistry?
Oh, yes. Yes, I have. As a matter of fact, I think, kids, before you joined us, I was saying how I'm on a couple of internet dental forums with a lot of wonderful dentists who we exchange ideas. And there are a small vocal group of ozone dentists who claim that ozone can basically do anything and everything. And so on a forum, if you say, I have this patient who has this, weird thing growing on their gum, put some ozone on it. Earaches, squirt some ozone in there. TMJ problems, jaw joint, squirt some ozone. And they're doing it like the direct gas or ozone generators that they actually are putting on to like tooth decay because ostensibly it's going to kill the bacteria or whatever, to bubbling it through different oils like coconut oil, sunflower oil, sesame oil, and then using that as some sort of tincture to rub on your gum if you have a sore or something like that, which I really have trouble with because ozone is such an unstable compound that I know that after about 5 minutes, there's no active ozone in that oil. So I just don't understand how that works, and I've never really gotten a satisfactory answer. So yes, ozone is a very small part of dental woo, but it's very active and very loud. And there's some very intelligent, well-meaning dentists who are promoting this and teaching on it. But that's what makes it difficult because there are a lot of really intelligent dentists, well-meaning. Again, they're not trying to scam people. They're trying to do the right thing for their patients.
I'm sure as well, if you started trying to use ozone to fill cavities, you'd just make the holes bigger, wouldn't you?
I have seen anecdotal videos and such where someone will come in with just massive amount of tooth decay and they won't do anything at all except apply ozone gas to the tooth decay. And they bring them back, and lo and behold, it's not soft and squishy and gross anymore. It's remineralized and it's hard. And man, my crap detectors just go off on full alert when that happens because I just don't think that's biologically plausible. Now that being said, I have really not delved deep into it. I have not looked over their shoulder. I've not studied it to any real depth. So maybe they're right and I'm wrong, but I remain unconvinced.
I think we should wrap up with a more general picture and talk about this special niche you filled in the skeptical movement. As your Twitter handle says, you are the skeptical dentist. And other areas of interest have been filled by so many other people. There's Dr. David Gorski talking about vaccines and a few other medicine-related topics. And last episode we had Phil Ferguson, who's like the skeptical investment advisor, and there's all these different research areas that skeptical and critical thinkers fill in and inform with their expertise on informing people how to think critically about them. Is that specialization something that's needed, or should people like yourself who speak at skeptical conferences try to communicate science by broadening a little, or is that specialization something that we actually need?
Oh, that's a great question, Ethan. And my own opinion is I think there needs to be both. I think over time, as I've done more and more of this, my interests have widened from the specific, i.e. dentistry, to the general. Because whether it's Phil, and that was a great episode, by the way, Phil's investing advice, or vaccines, or dentistry, or pharmacy, or whatever it may be, the same principles hold true. That we have to use our skepticism, we have to use our critical thinking skills, we have to, be able to discern what is legitimate, what is valid, and what is bunk, and what is sensationalistic and fear-mongering. And that I think you can boil everything that we all talk about, and that you can even bleed into religion and cults and everything. It's all a matter of being able to use our brain, being able to know when our brain is lying to us, and knowing what our blind spots are, all those hallmark principles of being a, quote, good skeptic involves. But also, you have to be able to answer, well, what about silver fillings? I mean, a non-dentist isn't going to take the time and make the effort to, do all the primary research and look into that. So there are people like me that they can say, hey, Grant, what's the deal on this? And I can tell them. And so I think it's both. I think that we do need specialists, quote unquote, in every area, because that's where the weak spots are. That's where if that niche isn't filled, then the alt med people or the anti-scientific people will gain a foothold. And then you never know where it can spread to from there. But also, I think that the overarching principles are of paramount importance. I mean, starting with raising kids and teaching youngest ages at school, because that's how you live your life. How do you know which car to buy? How do you know when it's safe to cross the street? I mean, everything in your life it's an algorithm of what's the right thing to do and what's the evidence for and against, and how do I ascertain and evaluate that evidence. So I think it's all kind of fluid, but I think both are needed.
Yeah, the critical thinking and skepticism aspect is what binds everybody together, and that's where the common ground is, even with everybody having their own area of expertise.
I couldn't agree more.
And it looks like we may be having some problems with Jen and Kitch, but
I'm hearing you just fine, Nathan, and I know that we're both recording, so hopefully...
Yeah, I'm hearing just fine as well. Well, I guess we'll wrap up by having you tell people where they can find you.
You bet. The best place to find me would be on Twitter. I probably spend most of my public interaction there. My personal handle is @SkepticalDDS, and then the podcast where Clay and I hang out is @PrismPodcast. Email address, prismpodcast@gmail.com. So if anyone has any dental questions or podcasts or any questions whatsoever, I really encourage them to reach out. I'm always willing and able to interact with people, and I welcome it. Hope that people find us.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. And just to get a few things out of the way for our listeners, we want to mention, as we always do at the end of these, that you can find us on Patreon now and support us if you love the show enough to do that. $5 or more donation gets you access to bonus content like extended interviews, early access to episodes, and of course, we're always working on trying to come up with new ideas for bonus content. And leaving us a review on iTunes helps us out a lot as well. And sharing, spreading the word, all that good stuff. We want to thank our two patrons in specific right now, Microbloganism and Josh at the Society for the Advancement of Science. Thank you both for your support. Thank you, Grant Ritchey Jr., for joining us on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been a wonderful discussion, and I appreciate you having me on.
Have you ever heard of a thing called fluoridation? Fluoridation of water?
Yes, I have heard of that, Jack, yes.
Well, do you know what it is? Do you realize that fluoridation is the most monstrously conceived and dangerous communist plot we have ever had to face?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic, the podcast where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a bi-weekly basis. I am your host, Nathan Dickey, and with me today is co-host Jen. How are you doing this fine Monday?
I'm feeling bright white and fresh, but not in a racist way.
Yeah, it's just the two of us today because our other two hosts are doing busy Monday stuff. but we'll pull through just fine, I think. Joining us today as our guest is Grant Ritchey Jr. Grant is a dentist by trade who is a vocal advocate for a rational and scientific worldview. He writes for the Science-Based Medicine website and co-hosts the PRISM podcast, where he, along with his
took the baton from Jason, and we've been going strong ever since.
Very cool. So you mentioned in our kind of pre-show instant messaging chat that you met Jenna at QED, and there's a dentistry story there.
Oh, yes, it's a great story. Jen, do you want to start, or do you want me to set the stage and then you take off, or what do you want?
Sorry, I'll let you set the stage. You're better than I am at this.
Okay, so I was invited to participate in a panel discussion last year at QED over in Manchester, which was a fantastic conference. As a matter of fact, I'll put a plug in for them. It's going to be in Manchester again in October, and anyone who can go, it's my favorite skeptical conference that I've ever been to, bar none.
Yeah,
but
I did miss it.
I got to sit in with 4 wonderful colleagues of mine, Laura Thomason from the Good Thinking Society, and then dentists Sean Sellers, Martin Law, and Sarah Farmer, who is also a practicing dentist. And the 5 of us were on a panel discussion about pseudoscience in dentistry, all the bad information that's out there, like fluoride, like you mentioned, Nathan, and amalgams and root canals, and such kind of wackier practices like oil pulling. And so, or teeth talk, or something really clever, and none of them really resonated because we wanted to not just make it about teeth. So I was talking to my daughter, who is phenomenally creative, and I just said, "Here's our problem. We're having trouble coming up with a name." And she just said, "Well, you think of a name, and it doesn't have to describe what you're doing. It just has to be a prism through which you see your mission." And I guess being concrete, I said, "Prism, that's a good word." And so we threw that out and said, "How about prism? It makes as much sense as anything else, and you can take it wherever you want it to go with it. It doesn't have to mean anything." And then we started, being cute and saying analyzing the spectrum of science. And so it just made sense, and we stuck with it, and now here we are.
Awesome.
Then to go on, so Jason and I, we started 4 years ago, 2013, and had a great run. And about a year and a half ago, Jason just had a lot of other things in the irons in the fire. He's like a triathlete. He's one of those weird freaks of nature who likes to run and bike and swim all the time, and he likes to travel. So he stepped down, and Clay Jones was a longtime friend of ours. He was actually our first interview that we ever did on the Prism, and then he co-hosted a couple of times, and he and I have been good friends on social media, and we'd met before. So I asked Clay if he wanted to step in, and he did, and Clay just being promulgated on this board. And I would tend to question anytime someone would say something like, "Well, try acupuncture for this," or "I try, whatever the alternative medicine, chiropractic, whatever that particular modality happened to be," I would challenge it. And of course, I was the closed-minded jerk, and there were very few science-based dentists who would join in or come to my aid. 2 of them, especially, the 3 of us would typically take on all comers. And one of them happened to be a dentist by the name of Jason Luchtefeld, who practices in Illinois. And so as we got to talking and got to know each other a little bit better, we decided that it would be a good idea to start a blog or some form of science-based dental outreach. And we actually met at TAM. We decided to go to TAM, the amazing meeting in Las Vegas, 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. And we decided to start this podcast. It was going to be heavy on the dental stuff, but it was mainly going to be advocating for a science-based worldview in the realm of critical thinking, medicine, dentistry. And the name Prism actually came from my daughter. She has a theater company, and we were trying to think of a clever name. And of course, dentists are pretty concrete individuals, so we would think about something like the Dental Skeptic Podcast.
Host Clay Jones analyzes the spectrum of scientific, rational, and critical thought. Grant joins us on the show today to discuss science-based dentistry, to debunk some wacky dental woo and fluoride conspiracy theories, and to talk a little about the niche he has filled in the skeptical movement. Welcome, Grant Ritchey Jr.
Well, thanks, Nathan and Jen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you.
So, start off talking a bit about who you are and what you're about. Tell us a bit about your podcast, what inspired you and Clay Jones to start it, and also where did the name come from? This is like your chance to pimp yourself.
Oh, let the pimping commence. Well, Clay isn't my original co-host. I ran the first one off. So, by way of context, I have been on a variety of internet dental forums almost since the internet began. There was actually the old Usenet user groups back on AOL back in the 90s. But over time, I've been on a couple of main dental forums on the internet, and it's really a great way to exchange ideas and also get to meet people from across the world. But one of the things that I noticed several years ago is there is quite a bit of alternative medicine, non-proven therapies, non-scientific based thinking that was being